Hey guys, my name is Mackenzie and welcome to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about all the books I read in 2021. So if you're looking for some book recommendations or are interested in reading in 2022, then keep on watching. So I read a total of 87 books in 2021, which is absolutely crazy because I only read 30 books in 2020 and my goal was to reach 100 books in 2022, but I'm going to go through the order on my Goodreads in which I read the books. I'm not going to go into details of every single book so you can form your own opinion of each book, but I will be giving the ratings of every single book. So let's start off with the first book I read in 2021. So the first book I read in 2021 was called The Kiss Thief by L.J. Shen. This is my first and probably the last book I'll ever read by her. This is one of my least favorite books of 2021. I absolutely hated this book. I rated it 1 star, so you can definitely say that 2021 was off to a great start. The next book I read was The Selection. This is the first book in the series. I rated it 3 stars. If you've never heard of this book, it's basically kind of like The Bachelorette, where there's a bunch of girls competing for the prince. Next, I read A Killer's Wife. This was a thriller book. It was definitely a twist at the end. I absolutely love this book and I gave it 4 stars. Then I decided to read a psychological thriller called What Lies Between Us. This is about a mother and daughter duo. Basically, the mother lives in the attic and the daughter is keeping her up there, and the whole time you're trying to find out why is the mother in the attic. Very, very interesting story, and I also gave this book 5 stars. So then I read The House Guest by Mark Edwards. This is probably one of the worst books I also read in 2021. I gave it 1 star. Next, I read A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. This book is also really popular on TikTok right now. It was a very fast-paced book. I believe I read it in 1 day. It is a thriller book about a girl, and she basically tries to solve a murder that happened in her town a couple years ago for a school project. Very interesting story. I only rated it 3.5 stars, and I can't remember why, but I would recommend this book. So the last book I read in January is called One of Us is Lying. This is a very interesting story about 5 kids who go to detention, but only 4 make it out alive. The one passes away in detention, and the whole time you're trying to figure out what happened and who was the murderer. It's very much Breakfast Club vibes if you've ever seen that movie. And I believe this book is now a TV series. I would definitely recommend this one. I did enjoy it a lot, and I believe I gave it 4 stars. The first book I read in February was called How to Fail at Flirting by Denise Williams. I actually really enjoyed this book. This was a romance book. I'm not a huge fan of romance books. I find them very cheesy, but I gave this book 4 stars. It was really cute. Next, I read The Color Purple by Alice Walker. This book is so beautifully written. I gave it 5 stars. It is basically about African-American women and their struggles growing up in the 20th century in Georgia, and it follows 2 sisters who were separated when they were younger, and they hope to meet again one day. The ending is just so sad but so beautiful, and I absolutely love this book. I then read My Sister the Serial Killer, basically about 2 sisters, but one has a problem killing her boyfriends. Interesting book, kind of funny at times, and I rated this 3 stars. And then I read one of my favorite books of 2021 called A Thousand Boy Kisses by Tilly Cole. It's basically childhood friends to lovers, kind of. Basically about 2 characters who grew up living together. They were neighbors, but the one, Rune, he is the boy in the story, has to move away with his family. And when he moves away, Poppy, who's the girl in the story, decides never to talk to him again, like just basically cuts him off. But when Rune is 17, his family decides to move back to their old house. So once again, he is neighbors with Poppy again, and he's trying to find out why Poppy stopped talking to him. And when he finds out the reason why, it's just so sad and so heartbreaking. You will definitely cry reading this book, and I gave it 5 stars. Next, I read Such a Fun Age. This is about a black babysitter who works for a very, very rich white woman, and one day the black babysitter is at the supermarket with the white child, and she gets stopped by the police because they think that she is kidnapping the white child because she is black. I personally, though, did not like the story that much. I found it boring at times, and I did not love the writing style, so I only gave this book 2 stars. Next, I read The Hating Game by Sally Thorne. This is another popular book that I see all over BookTok, but I personally did not like it that much. It is an enemies to lovers book, and I believe I gave it 3 stars. I then read How We Fight for Our Lives. This is a memoir about Saeed Jones. This is the first memoir I have ever read, and I absolutely loved it. The book is about his story of growing up in the South as a young gay black man and the struggles that he faced throughout his life. And I gave this book, I believe, 4 stars. So moving right along, I believe we are on number 16, and this will be starting the books I read in March. And the first one I read was Anna and the French Kiss. So Anna and the French Kiss is a young adult romance book. This is a very cute story. It takes place in Paris, and while I was reading it, I went to go to Paris so badly. I did enjoy the book. It was kind of a little too young for me, so I rated it 3 stars. Next, I read Ugly Love by Colleen Hoover. You probably have heard of her all over TikTok. I read some of her other books. Verity is my favorite by her, but this is basically another romance book. It follows Tate and Miles. They basically have a friends with benefits type of story. They're not looking for love, but of course they end up falling in love with each other. I didn't love this one as much as everyone else does. Please don't hate me, but it just was not my favorite. I believe I gave it a 3.5 stars. Next, I read Red, White, and Royal Blue. This is a romance novel about the president's son and Prince Henry, and they have to stage a fake friendship. It's an enemies to lovers trope. I did enjoy this book a lot, and I believe I rated it 3.5 stars. The next book I'm going to talk about is one of my favorites of 2021, and that is The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. You've probably seen this book all over TikTok. I've never read anything like it. Definitely a lot of Greek mythology, but it was pretty easy to understand with some romance involved. And I cried reading this book, and I don't really cry that much when I read books, but the ending of this just tore at my heart. I absolutely love this book, one of my favorite reads, and I would highly, highly recommend. Of course, I gave it 5 stars. And another great book I read in March was Daisy Jones and the Six, once again by Taylor Jenkins Reid, one of my favorite authors. This book was so different from anything else I've ever read, told in like an interview style. Absolutely obsessed with this book. It feels like they're a real band. And of course, I gave this book 5 stars. I loved it so much. So the next 2 books I read are both by the same author, Agatha Christie. She is my favorite author of all time. She is the queen of murder mysteries. So I'll talk about this book first. This is The Mysterious Affair at Styles. Of course, Styles, I had to get it because Harry Styles, even though it has no correlation at all with this book. This is basically a murder mystery about someone who gets poisoned. I rated this one 3 stars. And then I read The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. This is definitely one of my favorite books by Agatha Christie. The ending, there was a huge plot twist. I did not see it coming. I gave this book 5 stars. If you love murder mysteries or any type of thriller novels, I would definitely suggest reading any of Agatha Christie's books. Next, I read Know My Name by Chanel Miller. This is a memoir about her story. If you don't know her story, definitely look it up. This is one of my favorite books of 2021. I believe it was in my top 3. Highly recommend. Such a beautiful, sad story, but so inspiring to other people, and I gave this book 5 stars. Next, I read The Midnight Library. It's definitely a novel that will keep you thinking about the future and about life, and I gave this book 4 stars. Next, I read Punk 57 by Penelope Douglas. I feel like with Penelope Douglas's books, they're either a hit or miss. People either love them or hate them. I didn't mind this book that much, and I rated it 4 stars. So then starting with the books I read in April, I read Birthday Girl, also by Penelope Douglas. I didn't like the book that much, so I gave this one 2 stars. And moving right back to Agatha Christie, I then read Death on the Nile. This book is supposed to be a movie, and I'm not sure when this is coming out, but I did enjoy this one a lot, and I believe I gave this 4 stars. Next, I read Everything I Never Told You. This is, I believe, the same author as Little Fires Everywhere. I believe I gave this book 3.5 stars. I then read Twice in a Blue Moon by Christina Lauren. This was a romance book basically about second chances. I did not like this book at all, and I gave it 1 star. I then read One of Us Is Next, which is the second book to One of Us Is Lying. I didn't love this one as much, and I gave this one 3 stars. I then decided to read Beach Read by Emily Henry. I absolutely love this book. It is a romance book, and I gave this 4 stars. I then read The Perfect Marriage. This is a thriller book. I enjoyed it in the beginning, but I found the ending very predictable, so I gave this one 3 stars. Next, I read November 9th by Colleen Hoover. Yes, I read this book in April, even though the title is called November 9th, but this basically follows 2 main characters, Phelan and Ben, and they decide to meet every year on November 9th, hence the title of the novel. I didn't love this one as much. This is probably one of my least favorite by Colleen Hoover, just because I didn't love the main character, Ben, that much. I thought he was kind of mean at times. So I believe I gave this book 3 stars. Next, I read The Woman in Cabin 10. This is a psychological thriller. Wasn't my favorite, kind of found it boring and confusing at times, so I gave this book 3 stars. Next, I read The Silent Patient. This is a psychological thriller about a woman who one day decides to shoot her husband and never to talk about it again. No one knows the reason why she did it. Definitely an interesting read. One of my favorite thrillers I've ever read, and I rated this book 5 stars. I then read The Outsiders. This is a really popular book that most people read in high school. I didn't have to read it in high school, so I decided to pick it up, and I absolutely loved it. I gave it 4.5 stars. I then decided to read The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. This is one of my favorite books I've ever read. This book is about World War II, when the Nazis invaded France. It follows two sisters and their different point of views about the war, and basically the struggles that they went through. It was very different from any Holocaust book I've ever read. It was absolutely heartbreaking. At the end, I cried, and I gave this book 5 stars. I then decided to read another Colleen Hoover book. I read Heartbones. This book is great to read in the summer, very much vacation, beach vibe. I enjoyed this book. It wasn't my favorite, but I gave it 3.5 stars. I then decided to read People We Meet on Vacation. This is also by Emily Henry. She's the same author that wrote Beach Read. The People We Meet on Vacation is about two friends, a boy and a girl, and they basically decide to go on vacation every single summer, but something happened the one summer, so they decided never to talk again. The People We Meet on Vacation had so much potential to be such a great book, but the ending, it was just awful. Like, I hated it. I felt like I wasted my time reading this book. Anyway, I gave it 3 stars. I then decided to read 2 books by Elaine Hildebrand. Hopefully I'm saying her name right. She has become one of my favorite authors, but the reason why I would recommend her books in the summer, because all of them take place on a small island called Nantucket. I believe it is off the coast of Massachusetts. I first read The Perfect Couple. This is basically a story about a wedding that takes place, but I believe the bridesmaid winds up dead before the wedding, and the whole time you're trying to figure out who did it. It's definitely a whodunit type of book, murder mystery. I really enjoyed this, but the ending kind of fell flat, so I gave this one 4 stars. I then read 28 Summers by the same author. This one is not a murder mystery. This is actually a romance novel. Takes place between 28 summers. It's definitely one of those books where it's like right person, wrong timing. This one was really sad, and I enjoyed it a lot, and I also gave this book 4 stars. I then read All the Light We Cannot See. This is a beautifully written story, also following World War II when the Nazis invaded Paris, but the main character in the story is actually blind, so she like knows what's going on, but of course she can't see what's happening. Very interesting book, and I gave this one 3.5 stars. So of course I had to read another book by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This one is called Malibu Rising. I absolutely love this book. This is definitely the perfect book to read in the summer, or if you're on vacation. I would highly recommend, and I gave this book 5 stars. Next, I read The Unhoneymooners. This is a romance book by Christina Lauren. This one was an okay read, and I gave this 3 stars. Next, I'm going to talk about my favorite series, which is the Bridgerton series. I absolutely love these books so much. So each book in the series follows a different Bridgerton sibling and their love story. I'm not going to rate each book, but I'm going to give 5 stars overall to the whole series. Next, I read The People We Keep, and I rated this book 3 stars. I then read Not a Happy Family. This is a thriller book, and I rated this book 4 stars. Next, I read The Last Thing He Told Me. This is also a psychological thriller. This is probably one of the worst books I've ever read. I found it very boring and just like not thrilling at all, and I gave this book 2 stars. I then read The Summer of Broken Rules. This is a young adult romance book. I found it very cute. Absolutely love the story, and if you're a Taylor Swift fan like I am, then I think you would love this book because there's some references in here to her song Steven, so I definitely would recommend reading this. I gave this book 4 stars. Next, I read The Inheritance Games, and I gave this book 3.5 stars. So starting in September, I read It Happened One Summer by Tessa Bailey. This was a cute rom-com book with a grumpy sunshine trope, and I gave this book 3 stars. So then for some reason in September, I got into dark academia books, and I read If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio. I really enjoyed this book. A lot of people say it's like The Secret History. I've also read The Secret History. I personally like this book a little bit better. I thought it was an easier read. Basically, it follows a group of college kids. They're very much into Shakespeare, and one of them dies. You find out like who dies in the beginning, and then it's kind of like leading up to like what happened. I really enjoyed this book, and I gave this 4 stars. I then read The Atlas 6. This is also another dark academia book. It's also fantasy. I'm not a huge fan of fantasy books. I found this book a little bit confusing at times. I personally did not enjoy it, and I gave this book 3 stars. Next, I decided to pick up a classic, and I read The Picture of Dorian Gray. I gave this book 5 stars. I absolutely loved it. Next, I decided to read The Answer Is by Alex Trebek. This is a biography book about Alex, who, if you don't know, was the host of Jeopardy. This is definitely one of my top 5 favorite reads of 2021. I'm a huge Jeopardy fan. Love Alex so much. Definitely would recommend reading his story. And of course, I gave this book 5 stars. The next book I read was called Little Secrets. This is a thriller book, very fast paced, about a kid who gets kidnapped and his mom's trying to find out what happened to him. I gave this book 4 stars. So the first book I read in October was The Halloween Party. This is by Agatha Christie, and like I mentioned before, she is my favorite author. It's basically about a murder that takes place at a Halloween party. This is a very great book to read in October if you're looking for a murder mystery, and I rated this book 4 stars. I then read another thriller called The Whisper Man, and I gave this book also 4 stars. And then I decided to reread my favorite book in the whole world, which is this book right here. This is called And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. I read this book in high school. It is one of the only books I've ever reread, and also one of the only books I've ever annotated, but it's my favorite book in the whole world. It is a murder mystery. It follows 10 strangers who get invited by this mysterious guest all to this island, and one by one they start dying. I'm like so obsessed with this book, highly recommend, and of course I gave this book 5 stars. The last book I read in October is called Vicious. This is so different from any other book I've ever read, and I really enjoyed it. I gave this book 4 stars. So moving into the month of November, I was also in another reading slump, but the first book I read was Love in Other Words by Christina Lauren, and I actually really enjoyed this book. It's probably one of my favorite romance books I've read. I gave this book 4 stars. Next, I read The Secret History by Donna Tartt. This was the thickest and heaviest book I read of 2021. I thought it was a very interesting read, very much dark academia vibes, and I gave this book 3.5 stars. Next, I decided to read My Policeman. Did I read this book because Harry Styles is going to be in the movie? Yes I did. But I really enjoyed this book and I gave this 5 stars. The last book I read in November was The Final Girl Support Group. This is a thriller book. I absolutely hated it and I rated it 2 stars. And then in December, I finally was out of my reading slump and I read a total of 10 books. The first book I read was called In My Dreams I Hold a Knife. This is a psychological thriller. I absolutely loved it. It reminds me a lot of The Secret History and If We Were Villains, a very great thriller, and I gave it 5 stars. Next, I read To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee, and I gave this book 5 stars. Next, I decided to pick up more Agatha Christie books. I read this Christmas murder novel, and I gave this one 4 stars, and then I read 5 Little Pigs, and I gave this one 3 stars. Next, I read Behind Closed Doors, and I gave this book 3 stars. I then read The Cheat Sheet. This is a cute romance novel, and I gave this one 3 stars. Next, I decided to read The Love Hypothesis, which is really popular on BookTok right now. It is a cute romance novel, and I gave this 4 stars. It would have been 5 stars, but I didn't love the ending that much, but I still would recommend reading it. I then decided to pick up this psychological thriller called A Flicker in the Dark, and I gave this book 3 stars. Next, I read Flock, which is the first book in the Ravenhood series, and I absolutely hated it. I gave this book 2 stars, and I don't think I will be reading the rest of the series. And the final book I read in 2021 was called To Love Jason Thorne. This is a cute romance story, very easy read, and I gave this book 3 stars. So those were all the books I read in 2021. A total of 87 books. My goal next year is to reach 100 books. So if you like this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up. Comment down below what your favorite book was of 2021 and also what other book videos you want to see. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video.